So if you're looking for my funny videos, this is not one of them. I mean, maybe I say something funny in it, but this is a camera review, obviously. So if you're looking for the funny stuff, there's a playlist called Sketches, and then there's also a playlist for reviews and reactions. So I'm sorry, I'm not feeling good. That's why this is not going to be funny, but I'll get some funny ones soon. I am in the process of switching over from my Canon full frame and APS-C gear over to Panasonic Lumix Micro Four Thirds system. This is the first video I'm shooting on my new GH5. So the one thing that was holding me back was low light performance. I've got my Canon gear out here and I've got some Lumix gear out here. I could spend forever doing like a million little tests. The tests I'm gonna do for this video are just gonna try to give me an idea of equivalency as far as, you know, what I'm gonna get for low light, how far the cameras are from each other. And you know, one thing I've noticed is that though the low light isn't quite as good on the GH5, the overall look of the video and the noise profile is just so much better. Like, the noise that it does have doesn't ruin the video as fast as it does, you know, on the Canon. I mean, above 1600 ISO, and I mean, it's bad, you know, whereas at 6400 on this GH5, it's not great, but it's not terrible either. And I mean, this is low light. You know, if you don't believe me, it's literally just some string lights out here. And this is the kit lens on the Lumix, no speed booster. This is the 12 to 35 kit lens. So I do have the dual IS and everything going right now. First test I'm gonna do, I wanna see how much light these sensors are getting. And again, I could use my fastest lenses. I could do all kinds of in detail stuff, but all I want to do is kit lens for kit lens with the bodies, just to kind of see a baseline. So I'm going to do a little quick astrophotography. I'm going to match the settings on all the cameras and see how bright the image is and how bad the noise is. So I took some shots of the night sky with all the same settings, and I'll show those to you now. So looking at the 6D, I mean, this is a good baseline, full frame. And then the Lumix GH5, I did screw up by having the lens open at 2.8, but I mean, that's as wide as it goes, so I'm testing the kit lens as well. And now at 100%, I noticed the Canons seem to have chunkier noise, which I don't see here in the GH5, and I definitely see in the 70D. There's a lot of chunky color noise. Again, this is not the most scientific test, but basically I'm testing with a kit lens and similar settings just to kind of see what we're talking about as far as the light we're getting and the noise we're getting. So an interesting thing is I just took a shot of this area. I just took a shot of that area with this GH5, and the GH5 actually focused and resolved an image fairly well. I've got the 70D on here now, and I noticed that it is unable to get focus. Like, it just drifts. It will not focus. So I'm going to manually focus that and let's see what we get. Obviously not too bad for automatic settings. I mean, it's an image and it's pretty clear. There's definitely some noise, but it's serviceable. The 6D, as expected, doing pretty well on automatic settings. Definitely a lot less noise than with the 70D. Also, as predicted, the GH5 with the smaller Micro Four Thirds sensor, not seeming to pull in as much light, and there is some degradation and noise when cropped in. It looks like the Canons are definitely resolving a better image in the low light. I mean, but again, this is just on automatic settings. I'm putting it on program mode just because I'm trying to kind of see what the camera is thinking, what the camera is doing. I could obviously tweak these settings to get different results, but it looks so far like we're definitely getting much brighter, cleaner results, but the focusing is much worse. Although the 6D did focus much faster than the 70D. The 70D never focused. Now I'm introducing the Lumix G7, and as predicted, it doesn't do the best in low light, and there's a lot of noise. So what it looks like to me is that the Panasonics are just slamming the ISO all the way through the roof instead of going to a longer shutter. So I'm gonna see what settings I used, what settings the Canons chose, and I'm gonna match those settings in the two Panasonics and then show the results. This test showed me that while the smaller sensor does impact the amount of light it's gathering, it's not as severe as it would first look. The Canons are just far superior at selecting automatic settings for taking low light photos. Although I do maintain that the Panasonics were considerably faster at achieving autofocus. Again, with the 70D never reaching autofocus and the 6D doing a bit of hunting, whereas the GH5 locked on instantly and the G7 still quicker than the 6D. Once I put the settings into the Panasonic and actually do a long exposure, instead of it just assuming I want to use 25,600 ISO, all of a sudden the images look a lot closer to the Canons. So it's capturing light, it just doesn't have the best automatic settings in low light, which you should never be taking nighttime photos on program auto anyway. So here we are starting off at 100 ISO. I will step up through each ISO with all four cameras. Again, this is the kit lens. All lenses are wide open, and I am shooting with a 180-degree shutter, meaning 1/60th of a second for 30 frames progressive footage. That's 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, 12,800. Now recording with the 6D at 100 ISO, 200 ISO, 400 ISO, 800 ISO, 1600 ISO, 3200 ISO, 6400 ISO, 12,800 ISO, ISO 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400. At 100 ISO, 200 ISO, 400 ISO, 800 ISO, 1600 ISO, 3200 ISO, 6400 ISO. Starting with the GH5, 200% crop at 6400 ISO. The full frame 6D looking just a bit soft, and the 70D looking chunky but funky with that chunky noise. I know for the last bit the GH5 was in full HD mode, not 4K mode. I know I had to go back and check the files because it looks so much sharper that I just assumed that it had to be in 4K while the others were in 1080. No, the GH5 is just that much sharper. And yes, I know that this video is a fucking mess because I was sick for like a week. I was having really bad headaches, and then I threw my back out for several more days building a new fence. So I have a bunch of shit to edit that's from the other night, and now I'm just kind of shooting stuff to put in here. So enjoy. It's cold and I'm being lazy today, so I'm not even bothering with my full light setup and all that stuff. I'm just hand holding the camera, which I can do with the GH5 because the GH5 is awesome. To get an idea of what the sensor noise looks like on each one of the cameras, I put body caps on them, and then allowed the camera to crank the ISO all the way up, and now I'm artificially boosting it in Premiere so we can see just how funky these sensors really are. It's hard to say exactly what this shows, but it's really clear that the GH5 has a much finer noise profile than the G7 or the two Canons. And yes, with a straight face, I did just say that the test doesn't really prove anything, mostly because I don't design camera sensors, so I don't know what that little test exactly tells you, but it tells you something. Anyway, after I went back in from the cold, I grabbed the tea light and a Baby Yoda toy, and I wanted to show you how they measure up with just one candle burning.
6D at 3200 ISO.
The GH5 at 3200 ISO.
.6D at 6400 ISO.
GH5 at 6400 ISO. The Canon 7DD at completely auto settings. And this is the Canon 6D at fully auto settings. This is the G7 at automatic settings. GH5 at completely auto settings. Auto ISO, auto aperture, auto shutter speed, and auto white balance. So I recorded the whole thing and then forgot that I had not used the speed booster. Well, this is with the Canon 16mm f2, which on this camera with the Viltrox 7.71 speed booster comes out to like a 23mm f2.8. The f2.8 estimate here is wrong, at least in terms of light gathering. So I thought that, you know, you're supposed to apply the crop factor, which is 2 from full frame to micro four thirds. I thought that it affected light gathering ability. You only need to apply the crop factor when thinking about the blurry background, the bokeh. In terms of light gathering ability, this lens with the Viltrox adapter is actually like an f1.4, not a 2.8. It is manual focus, but I mean, I am having no problems with low light. This is every bit as good as my Canons can do. I am standing out here 15 feet away from the lights, 20 feet away from the lights. I mean, that rocks.